The Duke caught his footman in the nursery. What he witnessed next brought tears to his eyes. The footman was singing a lullaby in a language Lucian Blackwood, Duke of Ravenscross, did not recognize. And his infant son, the heir who had refused comfort from every nurse, every maid, every expensive expert brought from London, was finally, blessedly falling asleep in the servant's arms. Lucian stood frozen in the nursery doorway, hidden by shadows, watching a scene that defied every rule of propriety and hierarchy that governed his world. Thomas Ashford, a footman of barely 2 months' employment, sat in the rocking chair meant for the wet nurse, cradling 6-month-old James with a tenderness that made Lucian's chest ache. The young man's voice was soft and melodic, the foreign words flowing like water over stones. And James, who had screamed for 3 days straight, who had driven 2 nurses to resignation and brought the household to the brink of collective madness, was surrendering to sleep with tiny, hitching breaths that spoke of exhaustion and relief. Lucian should have been outraged. A footman, a male servant of the lower orders, alone with the ducal heir in the middle of the night? It was scandalous, unthinkable, the stuff of dismissal without reference and whispered condemnation in drawing rooms across England. But all Lucian could feel, watching his son's tiny fist curl against Thomas's chest as the lullaby wound to a close, was a gratitude so profound it threatened to unmake him completely. Wait, before the next confession unfolds. If this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now back to the scene. The lullaby ended. Thomas continued to rock gently, his movements precise and practiced as though he'd done this 1,000 times before. James's breathing had evened out into the deep rhythm of true sleep, the first the child had managed in days. Lucian must have made some small sound, a breath, a shift of weight, because Thomas's head snapped up, his eyes widening in unmistakable terror. He began to rise, clearly intending to return James to his cradle and offer whatever explanation or apology might preserve his position. "Don't," Lucian said quietly, stepping into the candlelight. "Don't move. You'll wake him." Thomas froze, caught between obedience and panic. In the soft light, Lucian could see the young man more clearly than he ever had before. Thomas was perhaps 23 or 24, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes that appeared gray or perhaps green. It was difficult to tell in the dimness. He had the kind of face that artists might call interesting rather than handsome, strong-boned and angular, with an intensity that suggested intelligence carefully hidden beneath the blank servant's mask. "Your Grace," Thomas managed, his voice barely above a whisper, "I can explain." "Can you?" Lucian moved further into the nursery, careful to keep his distance so as not to startle the sleeping child. "Can you explain why my son, who has defeated every professional in London, is finally sleeping in the arms of a footman I hired 6 weeks ago to serve at table and answer doors?" Thomas's throat worked as he swallowed. "I heard him crying, Your Grace. The night nurse had stepped out, and I was passing by on my way to... I couldn't just leave him distressed." "So you picked him up, despite having no authority to do so, despite the fact that touching the heir to a dukedom could be grounds for dismissal or worse, depending on the duke's temperament." Lucian kept his voice neutral, watching emotions flicker across Thomas's expressive face: fear, defiance, resignation, and beneath it all, a fierce protectiveness that was wholly inappropriate for a servant and wholly admirable in a human being. "Yes, Your Grace, I picked him up." Thomas's chin lifted slightly. "And if that means I must leave your employ, then so be it. But I won't apologize for comforting a child in distress, regardless of his station or mine." The words should have been insolent. They should have prompted immediate dismissal. Instead, Lucian found himself asking, "That song, the lullaby, what language is it?" Thomas blinked, clearly thrown by the question. "Romani, Your Grace, the language of my mother's people." "Your mother was Roma?" "Is Roma, Your Grace, or was when I last saw her." Something flickered across Thomas's face, pain, old and carefully buried. "She lives still, as far as I know, but I haven't seen her since I was 14. There was a story there, Lucian sensed, a complicated one, full of the kind of details that polite society preferred to ignore. "And she sang that song to you?" "Every night, Your Grace, until the night she couldn't anymore." Thomas looked down at James, his expression softening. "When I heard Master James crying, I thought perhaps my mother's song might help where English lullabies had failed. It worked." Lucian moved closer, studying his son's peaceful face. James looked like his mother, Amelia, dead these 6 months from childbed fever, leaving Lucian with a title, a mourning wardrobe, and a son who had never known his mother's touch. Nothing else has worked. Not the nurses, not the physicians, not Dr. Morrison's patent sleeping draught. But you walked into this room and gave my son peace. "Children know when they're loved, Your Grace." Thomas's voice was quiet. "They know when someone genuinely cares versus when they're merely performing a duty. Perhaps Master James simply needed to feel that someone wanted to comfort him, not just silence him." The words struck like a physical blow. How many times had Lucian himself approached the nursery only to retreat, overwhelmed by his own grief and inadequacy? How many times had he told himself that James was better off with professionals, that a father's love was less important than proper care and feeding? How many times had he chosen duty over connection, exactly as his own father had done? "Teach me," Lucian said abruptly. Thomas's eyes widened. "Your Grace." "Teach me what you know, about comforting children, about that song, about whatever instinct or knowledge allows you to succeed where everyone else has failed." Lucian knew he was being ridiculous, knew that dukes did not ask footmen for instruction in anything beyond the proper way to serve wine. But watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time in days had stripped away his capacity for pride. "Please." For a long moment, Thomas simply stared at him. Then, carefully, as though testing the waters of an impossible situation, he said, "It's not complicated, Your Grace. Children need warmth, consistency, and genuine affection. They need to be held as though they matter, not as though they're fragile objects to be managed at arm's length." "I don't know how to do that," Lucian admitted, the confession emerging raw and unfiltered. "My own father was distant. Correct, I was raised by nurses and tutors, and saw him perhaps once a day for a brief interview on my progress. I thought that was normal. I thought that was how ducal heirs were raised." "Perhaps it is normal, Your Grace. But normal doesn't mean right." Thomas glanced down at James again. "Would you like to hold him? I can transfer him to you if you're careful not to wake him." Lucian's first instinct was to refuse. He'd held James perhaps half a dozen times since Amelia's death, always awkwardly, always with the sense that he was doing it wrong. But Thomas was offering him something more than just physical transfer of the child. He was offering a bridge across the chasm between duty and genuine fatherhood. "Yes," Lucian said, "show me." Thomas rose slowly from the rocking chair, every movement calculated to avoid disturbing the sleeping infant. "Support his head, Your Grace. Always support the head. And hold him close to your chest so he can hear your heartbeat. That's what babies find most comforting, the rhythm that sustained them before birth." Lucian positioned his arms as instructed, and Thomas carefully transferred James into them. The baby stirred slightly, making a small sound of protest, and Lucian's entire body tensed. "Don't panic," Thomas said, one hand remaining on James's back to steady him. "Just breathe normally and rock gently. Let him settle against you." Lucian did as instructed, forcing his breathing to even out. James squirmed for another moment, then seemed to recognize something, a scent perhaps, or the rumble of Lucian's heartbeat, and relaxed against his father's chest with a small sigh. "There," Thomas said, his hand falling away. "He knows you, Your Grace. He knows you're his father. He's just been waiting for you to know it too." The words should have been presumptuous. Instead, they felt like absolution. Lucian stood in the nursery, holding his son properly for the first time, and felt something crack open inside his carefully controlled heart. This was what Amelia had wanted, had begged for in her final lucid moments. "Love him, Lucian," she'd whispered, her hand gripping his with desperate strength. "Don't be like your father. Don't let duty steal all the warmth from him. Promise me you'll love him." He'd promised, and then he'd failed spectacularly, retreating into grief and letting nurses and servants manage the son he was too broken to face. "I've been a coward," he said, not sure if he was speaking to Thomas or to himself or to the ghost of his wife. "I've been hiding from him because looking at him hurts, because he has Amelia's eyes and her smile, and every time I see him, I remember what I've lost. Grief makes cowards of all of us, Your Grace." Thomas's voice held an understanding that suggested personal experience with loss. "But you're here now. That's what matters. Because you brought me here. If I hadn't heard that lullaby, if I hadn't seen my son sleeping peacefully for the first time," Lucian shook his head, "I would have continued hiding, continued failing him." "Then perhaps," Thomas said carefully, "the question is not why you failed before, but what you'll do differently from this moment forward." It was impertinent advice from a footman to a duke. It was also exactly what Lucian needed to hear. "Stay," Lucian said abruptly, "in the nursery, not as a footman, but as whatever James needs you to be. Companion, caretaker, teacher of Romani lullabies." He looked up, meeting Thomas's startled gaze. "I'll pay you properly, of course, far more than a footman's wage, and we'll find some title that makes it acceptable, assistant to the nursery maid or some such nonsense. But I need you here, Thomas. James needs you here. Your Grace, I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than anyone else in this household, apparently. You're certainly more qualified than I am." Lucian glanced down at his sleeping son. "Unless you don't want the position. If you'd prefer to continue as footman, I'll understand. This is highly irregular, and the other servants will talk." "The other servants always talk, Your Grace. It's what servants do." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'll stay. Not for the money, though I appreciate the offer, but for Master James. He deserves someone who will love him, not just manage him." Agreed. Lucian felt a weight he hadn't known he was carrying begin to lift. "And Thomas, thank you for caring when you had no obligation to do so. For seeing my son as a child who needed comfort rather than a problem to be solved. For being a better man than I've been these past months." Thomas ducked his head in something that wasn't quite a bow. "We all do what we can, Your Grace. Sometimes caring is the only power we have." They stood together in the candlelit nursery, an aristocrat and a servant, connected by their shared devotion to a child who would grow up never knowing how close he'd come to being raised without love. It was the beginning of everything that would follow, the scandal, the transformation, the love that would reshape all their lives in ways none of them could imagine. But for now, there was only this moment, a duke learning to hold his son, and a footman teaching him how. The household at Ravenscross Abbey adapted to the new arrangement with varying degrees of grace. Mrs. Thornbury, the housekeeper, was scandalized by the elevation of a footman to nursery duties, but pragmatic enough to recognize that James had stopped screaming. Miss Price, the senior nursery maid, resigned in a huff after 3 days of working alongside someone she considered beneath her station. The cook, Mrs. Fletcher, declared that she didn't care who minded the baby as long as everyone stopped walking around with exhausted, haunted expressions. Thomas moved into a small room adjacent to the main nursery, a space that had originally been intended for a governess or tutor. He brought with him few possessions, a worn leather satchel, a few changes of clothing, and a bundle of letters tied with string that he kept in a drawer and never spoke about. Lucian found himself spending more time in the nursery than he had in the entire 6 months since James's birth. At first, he told himself it was to supervise Thomas, to ensure the unconventional arrangement was working. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. He was learning to be a father, and Thomas was teaching him how. "Talk to him," Thomas would say, placing James in Lucian's arms. "He may be only 6 months old, but he knows your voice. Tell him about your day, about the estate, about anything. Let him learn the rhythm of your speech." Lucian, who had addressed the House of Lords without nervousness, found himself tongue-tied talking to his own infant son. We repaired the north fence today. The sheep were getting through. Very exciting for sheep, I imagine." Thomas had smiled at that, a quick flash of amusement that transformed his serious face. "Perfect, Your Grace, just like that. He doesn't need eloquence, he needs you." Day by day, Lucian grew more comfortable with the weight of his son in his arms, with the unfamiliar rhythms of feeding and changing and simply being present. Thomas was patient in ways the nurses had never been, offering guidance without judgment, stepping back when Lucian needed to work through challenges on his own. But it was the evenings that revealed the depth of what was developing between them, something that transcended the simple relationship of employer and employee, something neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. After James had been put down for the night, Lucian would linger in the nursery, ostensibly to review the day's progress or discuss any concerns. In reality, he was reluctant to return to the cold grandeur of the master's chambers, to the bed he'd shared with Amelia and had slept in alone since her death. "Tell me about the song," he said one evening, 3 weeks into the new arrangement. Thomas was tidying the nursery, putting away toys and straightening blankets with neat, economical movements. "The lullaby. What do the words mean?" Thomas paused, a stuffed rabbit in his hands. "It's a blessing song. It asks for protection from the night, for dreams of safety and warmth. It promises that morning will always come, that darkness is temporary." He set the rabbit in its basket. "My mother used to say that Romani lullabies carried old magic, that singing them over a child wove invisible threads of protection. Do you believe that? The magic? I believe in the power of love made tangible, Your Grace. Whether you call it magic or simply human connection, the effect is the same. A child who is sung to with genuine affection will carry that warmth through their life. Did you carry it with you?" Thomas was silent for a moment. Then he said, "For a time, until circumstances made it difficult to remember warmth." What circumstances? It was too personal a question. Lucian knew it even as he asked, knew he was overstepping the bounds between master and servant. But the walls between them seemed to grow thinner each evening, the careful distance eroded by shared purpose and something else, something that made Lucian's heart beat faster when Thomas smiled or when their hands accidentally brushed while tending to James. Thomas moved to the window, looking out at the darkening grounds. "My mother was Roma, as I said. My father was a gentleman, minor gentry, the younger son of a baronet. They met at a country fair. He was charmed. She was young and perhaps more trusting than she should have been. His voice was carefully neutral. I was the result. He paid for my early care, kept us in a cottage on his brother's estate. But when I was 14, he died in a hunting accident. His family turned us out immediately. No cottage, no income, no recognition of any connection to their name. They abandoned you. Lucian felt anger rise in his chest, sharp and protective. They had no legal obligation to do otherwise, Your Grace. I was a bastard. My mother was Roma. We had no claims, no rights. Thomas's shoulders were tense beneath his dark coat. We traveled with my mother's family for a time, but her brother believed she had shamed them by taking up with a Gadjo, a non-Roma man. Eventually, she left me at a foundling home in Yorkshire. She said it was temporary, that she would come back when she'd saved enough money. She never did. The story emerged without self-pity, but Lucian heard the wounds beneath the calm recitation. How did you survive? The foundling home placed me in service when I was 15. Kitchen work mostly. I was grateful for it. Many boys from such places ended up in workhouses or worse. I learned to be useful, to make myself invisible when necessary and present when needed. I learned the rules of service, the hierarchy, the careful dance of existing in a world not built for people like me. People like you, Lucian repeated. What do you mean? Thomas turned from the window, and in the candlelight, his face was unguarded in a way it had never been before. People who don't quite fit, Your Grace. Too educated to be comfortable as a laborer, too common to ever be accepted as anything else. People with Roma blood in a country that fears and despises the traveling folk. People who exist in the spaces between worlds, never fully belonging to any. Is that how you see yourself? As not belonging? It's how the world sees me, Your Grace. I've simply learned to accept it. Thomas moved back toward the center of the nursery, his mask of professional composure sliding back into place. But this position, caring for Master James, this is the first time I felt useful for something beyond polishing boots or serving wine. The first time I felt like I might have something genuine to offer. You have everything to offer, Lucian said, the words emerging with more intensity than he'd intended. You have patience and knowledge and a capacity for love that puts me to shame. You have the ability to see my son as a person worthy of devotion rather than an obligation to be managed. That's not nothing, Thomas. That's everything. Thomas stared at him, something flickering in those gray-green eyes. Surprise, perhaps? Or the beginning of hope? Your Grace. A wail from the cradle cut off whatever had been about to say. James had woken from his nap, unhappy and demanding attention with the imperious authority of someone who had learned his crying would bring immediate response. Lucian moved to the cradle automatically, lifting his son with the confidence that 3 weeks of Thomas's tutelage had built. It's all right, little one. Papa's here. Everything's all right. James settled slightly at the familiar voice, but continued to fuss, his small face scrunching with discomfort. Lucian looked helplessly at Thomas. I don't know what he needs. Check if he's wet first, Thomas said, moving to prepare a fresh cloth. Then we'll try feeding. He might have woken early from his nap because he's hungry. They fell into the comfortable routine they'd established, Lucian handling his son while Thomas provided supplies and guidance, both working in tandem to meet James's needs. It was domestic and intimate in a way that would have shocked anyone who saw it. A duke and a footman turned nursemaid functioning as partners in caring for an infant. Later, when James had been fed and changed and was dozing contentedly in Lucian's arms, Thomas said quietly, "You've become quite good at this, Your Grace. Master James is lucky to have you." "James is lucky to have us both," Lucian corrected. "I would still be hiding from him if you hadn't intervened that night. You saved him, Thomas, and perhaps you saved me as well." "I did nothing special, Your Grace. I simply couldn't walk past a crying child." "That's what makes it special." Lucian looked down at his son. "Most people can walk past distress when it's not their responsibility to address it. Most people, faced with a crying heir to a dukedom in the middle of the night, would have found a nurse or simply closed the door. You didn't. You chose compassion when you could have chosen self-preservation. That's the definition of character, Thomas." Thomas ducked his head, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "You give me too much credit, Your Grace." "I don't think I give you nearly enough." Lucian hesitated, then added, "You know, you don't have to call me Your Grace when we're alone in the nursery. Lucian would suffice." "That wouldn't be proper, Your Grace." "Very little about this arrangement is proper," Lucian pointed out. "We've already abandoned convention by having you here in the first place. What's one more small breach?" Thomas looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in the conversation. "It's not a small breach, Your Grace. Names carry intimacy. Using yours would be presumptuous. I'm giving you permission. How is it presumptuous if I'm asking you to do it?" "Because," Thomas said slowly, "it would make it harder to remember the distance between us. And that distance exists for a reason, Your Grace. I'm a servant, a bastard of mixed blood with no family name worth speaking, and no prospects beyond the generosity of my current employer. You're a duke. The gap between us isn't just one of station, it's a chasm. Pretending otherwise would be foolish." The words stung, partly because they were true, and partly because they articulated something Lucian had been trying not to examine too closely. He was drawn to Thomas in ways that transcended gratitude for the younger man's care of James. He found himself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the moments when Thomas's careful mask slipped and revealed the intelligent, wounded, complicated person beneath. He noticed things he shouldn't notice. The way Thomas's hands moved with unconscious grace, the line of his jaw when he turned his head, the rare smile that transformed his entire face. It was dangerous, inappropriate, impossible. And yet, standing in the nursery with his son sleeping peacefully between them, Lucian couldn't bring himself to care about the impossibility of it all. "Perhaps the distance exists," he said carefully, "because we choose to maintain it. Perhaps it's not as inevitable as you believe." Thomas's eyes widened slightly. "Your Grace?" "Think about it." Lucian interrupted before Thomas could articulate whatever protest he was forming. "That's all I ask. Think about whether the rules we're following serve any purpose beyond making us both miserable." He transferred James to his cradle and left the nursery before Thomas could respond, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He'd crossed a line. There was no pretending otherwise. He'd all but admitted to improper feelings for a servant in his employ, had suggested that the fundamental structures of their society could be challenged or ignored. It was madness. It was also the most honest he'd been with anyone, including himself, since Amelia's death. Thomas did not appear at breakfast the next morning. When Lucian inquired, Mrs. Thornbury informed him that Thomas had asked for his morning duties to be covered, claiming he was needed in the nursery for James's routine. It was avoidance, clear and simple. Thomas was hiding from the conversation Lucian had initiated, retreating behind the walls of propriety and professional distance. Lucian told himself to let it go. He'd made his position clear. If Thomas wasn't interested or was too sensible to entertain impossible notions of breaching social chasms, that was entirely reasonable. Lucian should respect that boundary and simply be grateful for Thomas's continued excellent care of James. He lasted until early afternoon before his resolve crumbled. He found himself walking to the nursery, drawn by what he told himself was concern for his son, but was actually the desperate need to see Thomas and assess the damage from the previous night's conversation. Thomas was on the floor of the nursery, building towers of wooden blocks for James to knock down. The baby was shrieking with delight each time the towers fell, and Thomas was patiently rebuilding them with the infinite tolerance that seemed to be his defining characteristic. "Your Grace," Thomas said, looking up as Lucian entered. His expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "I didn't expect you until this evening." "I wanted to check on James." The lie tasted sour on Lucian's tongue, but he pressed forward. "How is he today?" "Thriving, Your Grace. He had a good morning feeding and has been quite energetic." Thomas rebuilt another tower, and James immediately swiped it down with a chubby fist, giggling at his own power. "I think he's going to be a force to be reckoned with once he learns to walk." "No doubt." Lucian crouched down beside them, unable to maintain formal distance when his son was right there, so obviously happy. James immediately crawled toward him, babbling something that might have been an attempt at Papa. "He's starting to form sounds," Thomas said. "Nothing consistent yet, but he's trying. I've been talking to him constantly, as you suggested. I think it's helping." "You've been doing far more than I suggested." Lucian caught James as the baby attempted to climb into his lap. "You've been giving him what I couldn't. Genuine attention and affection without the weight of grief making everything complicated." Thomas was silent for a moment, stacking blocks into a new tower that he knew would be immediately destroyed. Then he said, quietly, "About last night, Your Grace, I've been thinking, as you asked." Lucian's pulse jumped. And I think you're lonely. I think you're still mourning your wife, and you found some comfort in our shared care of Master James. I think perhaps you've mistaken that comfort for something else, something that cannot and should not exist between us." Thomas finally looked up, his gray-green eyes direct. "I think it would be a kindness to both of us if we maintain appropriate distance and didn't confuse our roles." The words were a rejection, politely phrased but absolute. Lucian should have accepted them gracefully, should have been relieved that Thomas was being sensible where he himself had failed. Instead, he found himself saying, "What if you're wrong? What if what I'm feeling isn't confusion or misplaced grief, but genuine recognition of who you are and what you mean to me? Then you're feeling something that has no future, Your Grace. Even if, and this is entirely hypothetical, even if I were to return such feelings, what then? You're a duke. You need an heir and a spare, which means eventually you'll need to remarry someone appropriate to your station. You need to maintain your reputation and your position in society. And I need to remember my place and not let myself imagine impossibilities that would only bring pain." "You're right," Lucian said, "about all of it. I know you're right. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are different things, Thomas. And I can't seem to make myself feel the appropriate distance when I'm near you." James, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults, grabbed 2 blocks and banged them together with evident satisfaction. Thomas watched him for a moment, then said, "May I speak plainly, Your Grace? Please. I am illegitimate. I am part Roma, which much of your society considers only slightly better than criminal. I have no education beyond what I taught myself from stolen books and patient kitchen maids. I have no prospects, no family name, no fortune. I exist only through the charity of employers and the accident of not being entirely useless in a servant's role." Thomas's voice was steady, but his hands, stacking blocks, trembled slightly. "You are one of the premier dukes of England. You have wealth, title, estates, and a family lineage that stretches back centuries. You have responsibilities to your name, to your son, to society itself. The distance between us isn't just about propriety or class, it's about fundamental reality." "And yet," Lucian said, "none of that changes the fact that I care about you, that I value your presence in my life and my son's life, that I think about you constantly and find myself happier when you're near." "Your Grace, Lucian." The name emerged as though torn from Thomas against his will. "Please don't do this. Please don't make me hope for something that would destroy us both if we pursued it." "I'm not asking you to hope. I'm not even asking you to return my feelings." Lucian reached out, stopping just short of touching Thomas's hand where it rested on the floor between them. "I'm simply telling you the truth. You deserve to know that you matter, that you're seen as more than just a servant or a convenient solution to my childcare problems. You're a remarkable person, Thomas, and I'm grateful to know you." Thomas stared at the space between their hands, inches that might as well have been miles. "And what happens now? How do we continue working together, caring for your son, when this tension hangs between us?" "Carefully," Lucian said, "honestly. We acknowledge what exists and what cannot be, and we make peace with both truths." He finally withdrew his hand, creating physical distance to match the emotional barrier Thomas had erected. "I won't pressure you. I won't make you uncomfortable in your position here. But I also won't pretend I don't care about you. Is that acceptable?" "It's terrifying," Thomas admitted. "But yes, it's acceptable." They sat together on the nursery floor, James playing happily between them, while the unspoken truths of what they both wanted and what society would never permit settled into the space between them like dust in sunlight, visible but intangible, present but impossible to grasp. 3 months passed in a strange, suspended peace. Thomas continued to care for James, who thrived under the combined attention of his nursemaid and his increasingly present father. Lucian spent hours in the nursery each day, learning the rhythms of infant care, teaching himself to read his son's moods and needs. The other servants had long since accepted the unusual arrangement, aided by the fact that James's transformation from screaming nightmare to happy, healthy baby was undeniable evidence of Thomas's competence. But beneath the surface routine, tension simmered. Lucian caught Thomas watching him sometimes with an expression that suggested the younger man's feelings were not as firmly under control as he claimed. And Thomas surely noticed the way Lucian found excuses to linger in the nursery, the way his eyes followed Thomas' movements, the way casual touches, a hand on the shoulder, a brush of fingers passing James between them, had become both more frequent and more charged with meaning. It was Mrs. Thornbury who finally precipitated the crisis. She appeared at the nursery door one afternoon while Thomas was teaching James to clap his hands and Lucian was pretending to review estate documents while actually watching them both. "Your Grace," she said, her tone carrying the weight of serious business. "A word, if I may." Lucian followed her to the hallway, sensing trouble. Mrs. Thornbury was loyal and discreet, but she was also fiercely protective of the household's reputation. "Your Grace, I must speak to you about Thomas Ashford." "What about him?" "The servants are talking, Your Grace, about the unusual nature of his position here, about how much time you spend in the nursery, about the fact that he dines with you some evenings after Master James is asleep." She folded her hands in front of her, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "I have kept such gossip contained thus far, but I received a letter this morning from Lady Pemberton's housekeeper. It seems word has spread beyond our walls." "Questions are being asked about the young man you've elevated so far above his station." Lucian felt cold anger rise in his chest. "Questions of what nature?" "Questions about propriety, Your Grace, about whether the arrangement is entirely appropriate." Mrs. Thornbury met his eye steadily. "I am not speaking of my own concerns, you understand. I think Thomas is good for Master James and for you, but others are less charitable in their interpretations. Others can mind their own damned business. Others are society, Your Grace, and society has long teeth and sharp memories. If there is even a suggestion of impropriety, it will follow Thomas for the rest of his life, and it will attach itself to Master James as he grows older." She paused, then added more gently, "I am trying to protect all of you by bringing this to your attention now, before speculation becomes accusation." Lucian knew she was right. He'd been living in a bubble, pretending the nursery was a world apart from the judgments and strictures of the society he'd been born into. But reality was intruding, as it always did, with its reminders that happiness was a luxury afforded only to those who could defend it against scrutiny. "What would you suggest?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Put distance between yourself and Thomas, Your Grace. Resume your normal activities. Attend your clubs. Visit with your peers. Perhaps even consider accepting some of the invitations that have been extended to you. Show society that you are a duke fulfilling his obligations, not a recluse obsessed with his nursery and its keeper." She softened her tone. "Thomas will still be here. Master James will still receive excellent care, but the perception will shift away from whatever inappropriate narrative is being constructed." It was sensible advice, politically astute, exactly what someone in Lucian's position should do to protect his reputation and his son's future. It also felt like betrayal. "I'll consider your suggestions," he said stiffly. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mrs. Thornbury." She curtsied and departed, leaving Lucian alone in the hallway with the weight of reality crushing the fragile peace had constructed. He couldn't return to the nursery. Not yet. Not with this new knowledge making everything he felt for Thomas seem tawdry and scandalous rather than genuine and profound. Instead, he retreated to his study and poured himself brandy he didn't want, while trying to figure out how to navigate between what he wanted and what society demanded. Thomas found him there 2 hours later. Lucian knew it was Thomas before looking up, knew the pattern of his footsteps, the particular way he knocked on doors. "Your Grace, Mrs. Thornbury told me about the conversation you had. I thought we should talk." "Come in," Lucian said wearily. "Close the door." Thomas entered and shut the door behind him, but he didn't approach Lucian's desk. Instead, he stood near the entrance, maintaining careful distance. "I should leave," Thomas said without preamble. "Not just the nursery, the estate entirely. I'll give you a few weeks to find a suitable replacement, but then I should go." "No." The word emerged with more force than Lucian intended. "Absolutely not. James needs you. I need you." "That's exactly the problem, Your Grace. Your need for me has become visible enough that people are talking. And if they're talking, they're speculating. And speculation becomes rumor, and rumor becomes scandal." Thomas's voice was calm, but pain flickered across his face. "I won't be the cause of damage to Master James's reputation, or yours. I won't let my presence here hurt the people I care about. You're not hurting anyone. Gossiping fools with nothing better to do than invent scandal are the problem, not you. The cause doesn't matter, Your Grace. The effect does." "And the effect of my continued presence here, given what exists between us, will be damage to everything you hold dear." Thomas took a breath. "I've been selfish. I've let myself stay because being here, caring for Master James, spending time with you, it's been the happiest I've been in my entire life. But happiness built on potential harm to others isn't real happiness. It's selfishness dressed up as devotion." "So you'll just leave? Abandon James when he's attached to you? Abandon—" Lucian couldn't finish the sentence. "Abandon me." That's what he wanted to say, but he had no right to that claim, no right to demand Thomas remain when doing so might genuinely cause problems. "I don't want to leave," Thomas said, and for the first time his voice broke. "God help me, I want to stay more than I've wanted anything. But wanting something doesn't make it right. And staying here, allowing society's scrutiny to build, Allowing speculation about our relationship to touch Master James, that's not right. That's not what's best for the child I've devoted myself to." Lucian stood abruptly, moving around his desk toward Thomas. "What if we don't care what society thinks? What if we simply continue as we have been and dare anyone to challenge us?" "Then we lose everything," Thomas said flatly. "You lose your standing, your ability to advocate for Master James's future, your credibility in the House of Lords. I lose my position and any chance of finding another. And Master James grows up with the stain of scandal attached to his father and his childhood caretaker. Is your pride really worth that cost?" The words struck home because they were true. Lucian's position in society wasn't just about personal vanity. It was about the power to protect James, to ensure his son's future, to advocate for the estate and its tenants, and all the people who depended on the Duke of Ravenscross to fulfill his obligations. "I hate this," Lucian said, the admission emerging raw. "I hate that who I care about is determined by accident of birth and ancient prejudices. I hate that you're right, that the sensible thing is to create distance and let you leave and pretend none of this mattered. I hate all of it." "So do I," Thomas whispered. "But hating it doesn't change it." They stood facing each other across the study, the distance between them both physical and metaphysical. Lucian wanted to close that distance, to damn the consequences and simply take what happiness he could find. But Thomas's eyes held a plea. "Don't make this harder than it already is." And Lucian found he couldn't be that selfish. "If you leave," he said carefully, "where will you go? Do you have other prospects, another position lined up?" "I have some savings from what you've paid me. I'll go back to London, find work in another household far enough away that the gossip from here won't follow me." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I'll survive, Your Grace. I always have." "You deserve better than survival." Lucian wanted desperately to touch him, to offer some physical comfort to match the emotional anguish they both felt. "I'm a bastard servant with Roma blood, Your Grace. I deserve whatever scraps I can earn through hard work and good behavior. That's reality, no matter how much either of us wishes it were different." The resignation in Thomas's voice was worse than anger would have been. This was someone who had learned long ago not to hope for more, not to imagine that the circumstances of his birth could ever be overcome. "How long?" Lucian asked. "How long before you leave?" "I'll start looking for another position immediately. With good references from you, if you're willing to provide them, I should be able to find something within a month or 6 weeks." Thomas's hands clenched at his sides. "I know that's not much time to find someone to replace me with Master James, but dragging this out would only make it harder for everyone. I don't want to replace you. There is no replacing you. There has to be, Your Grace. Life continues. Children adjust. You'll find a good nurse, someone properly trained and appropriate to their station. Master James is young enough that he'll forget me within a few months." "I won't forget you," Lucian said, the words ick with unshed tears. "I'll never forget you, Thomas. You brought me back to life. You taught me how to be a father. You showed me what genuine goodness looks like in a world that often prizes everything but goodness. I will carry that for the rest of my life." Thomas's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down his cheeks, though he made no sound, didn't raise his hands to wipe them away. "I need to go," he managed, "before I say something or do something that makes this even worse." He turned toward the door, and Lucian found himself speaking before he could think better of it. "Thomas, wait!" Thomas paused, but didn't turn around. "If circumstances were different," Lucian said, his voice barely above a whisper, "if we lived in a world where class and blood and propriety didn't matter, would you stay? Would you let me? Would you want what I want?" For a long moment, Thomas stood frozen. Then, still without turning, he said, "Yes. God forgive me, yes." But we don't live in that world, Your Grace. We live in this one, and in this one, wanting isn't enough. He left then, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Lucian alone with his brandy and his grief and the crushing weight of a society that valued propriety over love. The next month was a special kind of torture. Thomas continued his duties in the nursery, but had erected careful walls between himself and Lucian. Their evening conversations ceased. Thomas took his meals with the other servants rather than in the nursery where Lucian might join him. When they had to interact for James' sake, Thomas was unfailingly polite and professional, but the warmth that had characterized their earlier relationship was gone, replaced by the kind of careful distance servants were supposed to maintain with their employers. James, sensing the change, became fractious again, not as dramatically as when he'd been an infant, but enough that his sleep suffered and his temperament grew more volatile. He would cry for Tata, his toddler's version of Thomas, and not be comforted until Thomas appeared. He clung to Thomas during the day and resisted being put down for naps. "He knows something's wrong," Lucian said one evening, watching Thomas rock a fussy James in the nursery's old rocking chair. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to Thomas in days beyond necessary exchanges about James' care. "Children are perceptive," Thomas said, his eyes on James's face rather than Lucian's. "They sense emotional distress in the people they're attached to. He'll settle once things change. Once I leave," he meant. Once James was forced to adjust to a new caretaker and learned to accept that Thomas was simply gone from his life. "I received letters of reference inquiry from 3 households. I haven't responded yet. Your Grace, you promised you would provide references. I need them to secure another position. I know what I promised." Lucian moved further into the nursery, drawn, despite himself, to where Thomas sat with James. "I'm just struggling with the reality of writing them, with making your departure feel official and inevitable. It is inevitable, Your Grace. We discussed this. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed." Lucian crouched beside the rocking chair so he could see James's face. His son was finally settling, the toddler's eyes growing heavy. "Before you came, I was barely surviving. I was a ghost in my own house, going through the motions of life without actually living. You changed that. You showed me how to be present, how to connect, how to feel things again, even when feeling things hurt. And now you're leaving, and I'm supposed to just, what? Go back to who I was before? No, Your Grace. You're supposed to continue being the father you've learned to be. You're supposed to thrive without me, because that's what's best for Master James." Thomas finally looked at him, his eyes reflecting candlelight and something that might have been longing. "I was never meant to be permanent. I was just a bridge to help you cross from grief to genuine fatherhood. You're across now. You don't need the bridge anymore." "That's a very tidy metaphor," Lucian said bitterly. "It makes it all seem so reasonable and inevitable. But it's not tidy. It's messy and painful, and I resent the hell out of everyone who's made it necessary. Resenting society won't change it, Your Grace. Maybe it should change. Maybe institutions that force good people to live half-lives because of arbitrary rules about class and blood and propriety are institutions that deserve to be challenged." Thomas's laugh was sad and without humor. "You sound very revolutionary, Your Grace. But revolution is a luxury of the powerful. The rest of us simply survive within whatever system we're born into." James had fallen asleep fully now, his small body relaxed in Thomas's arms. Thomas stood carefully and carried the toddler to his bed, laying him down with the practiced gentleness that Lucian had come to associate with everything Thomas did. "I'll write the references tomorrow," Lucian said. "I'll make sure they're glowing enough that you'll have your pick of positions." "Thank you, Your Grace." The formality was like a wall of ice between them. Lucian hated it. He hated that they'd gone from genuine friendship, and yes, something more than friendship, to this stilted, painful politeness. Thomas, he said, as the younger man moved toward the door, I want you to know that if things were different, if I could offer you something more than just references and gratitude— Please don't, Thomas interrupted. Please don't tell me what could have been in another world. It doesn't help. It just makes this harder. It's already as hard as it could possibly be. Then let's not make it worse by indulging in fantasies about impossible futures. Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. Let me leave with dignity, Your Grace. Let me go, knowing that I did right by Master James, even if it means breaking both our hearts in the process. He left before Lucian could respond, leaving the Duke of Ravencross alone in the nursery with his sleeping son and the growing certainty that he was making a terrible mistake.